the strongest way to stay motivated and to stay connected is with what the cause is. It is essentially that to ensure that you know your why is always the biggest driver. It's important to point out, I think, for me to say here that, I'm not unique or exceptionally driven than any other individual. I've had moments in the past where I've struggled to remain motivated, especially when you're going through hard times. But I've managed to redesign my life and my career into one that serves me without being anything exceptional, into one where, happiness is now prioritised.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Find out what it takes to truly discover what it takes to elevate your career within payroll as we meet with the industry leaders who are shaping the industry for tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the Payroll Podcast, a special episode today in light of the current crisis we are all experiencing at the minute in relation to COVID-19. I am welcoming Jazz to the show, who's going to tell us all about how we can navigate these choppy waters, really, to make sure we stay positive, to make sure that we are able to really make the most of the situation we are in at the minute. So rather than me give you those answers, I've got an expert right next to me right now who I'd love to chat to in more detail. So I'm going to kick straight off. Tell us a little bit about your background, Jazz, and why in particular you like to work with professionals at the moment. And I'll just caveat this slightly with the fact that most of my audience are payroll professionals who are working round the clock at the moment to make sure those staff that have been furloughed during the crisis are getting paid. It's a very, very complex time for payroll professionals who are working many, many hours. They're kind of been hit with new statutory sickness payment terms and legislation, furlough calculations which have come in, and of course it's year-end time at the moment as well in April. So really, really pressured time for payroll professionals. Tell us a little bit about your work and how you've developed your profession to date to work with the kind of professionals that will be listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. So, hello, Nick. Thanks for having me on today. It's an absolute honour to come on and speak with professionals. It's who I work with. I mainly work with just private professionals on a one-to-one basis, but I also work with employees in business. So I understand the pressures and stresses of the challenges we face at work and in our career on a daily basis. Along with all the ones that you've just outlined. So there's two main reasons why I myself work with professionals. So the first one is, it comes back to my own journey, really, at the time of my own breakdown. So there is a wider story on my website that goes into my own mental breakdown, which was about 10 years ago. And at that time, I myself was a professional working in a corporate environment, in the corporate world. And when I was struggling with the everyday stresses, along with some trauma that I was going through at the time, the only suggestion that was made to me was counselling. And although counselling is an amazing tool, it did take me around 2 years to reach out, which is a long time to be suffering with mental health issues. And as a result, I ended up in counselling for 4 years. But after 6 months of counselling, I craved something that was a lot more forward-thinking and solution-focused. And there wasn't that alternative out there, not one that I was aware of anyway at the time. And years later, I discovered coaching and the world of coaching, which is much more forward-thinking and solution-focused. So I realised that although CEOs and business owners and high-level management tend to be aware of coaching and the benefits of it, many everyday professionals knew very little about coaching and the benefits. And where I ended up in counselling for 4 years, in hindsight, a coach would have been ideal for me, probably around 6 months after the counselling, and it would have served me better. And my second reason, I guess, is that when my mental health issues came about, they affected absolutely everything. So prior to my breakdown, I had a career, I was a hard worker, I was motivated, quite driven to achieve. But as a result of my breakdown, I was unable to cope and I left my job, which meant I lost my career. And so now I serve those everyday professionals because everyone deserves exceptional happiness. And a lot of my work is around helping professionals to reignite and prioritise their happiness. We don't need to have exceptional job roles and be huge business owners and big CEOs to be able to deserve exceptional happiness.
Yeah, I think that's fantastically put. I'm a huge advocate for the kind of work that you do as well. And for those that are listening to this, some may and some may not be familiar, but I myself had a maybe not quite as profound as your breakdown, but I had some counselling myself for nearly a year, about 10 years ago, when I had some traumatic issues that I dealt with myself. And my wife as well has also experienced both counselling and professional job coaching, which has helped with some anxieties that she was suffering through work-related activities. So it's something that speaks really closely to my heart. I think it's, there are sometimes stigmas related to things like counselling and coaching, and I think we need to remove those, because for those that embrace it, there is so much beautiful, energizing kind of work that can come out of it that you find from inside. It's amazing. And that's something I'd really like to sort of bring out of yourself, Jazz, with your expertise. For those listening to it who have either experienced previous traumatic times, perhaps not COVID related at all, or perhaps right now are struggling with motivation at work due to the crisis, due to anxieties they may have about their family, about their financial positions, or whatever it might be. How would you recommend people listening to this stay motivated to keep pushing forwards during the more difficult times?
Absolutely, that's a really good question, Nick. Motivation's can be quite frugal at times, and I guess for me, I think that the strongest way to stay motivated and to stay connected is with what the cause is. It is essentially that to ensure that you know your why is always the biggest driver. It's important to point out, I think, for me to say here that, I'm not unique or exceptionally driven than any other individual. I've had moments in the past where I've struggled to remain motivated, especially when you're going through hard times. And mindset will come into it, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. But I've managed to redesign my life and my career into one that serves me without being anything exceptional, into one where, happiness is now prioritized. And I think, as I said, my first tip is always to stay connected to your why. So whenever we're creating a change, whenever we're trying to achieve a task, it's really good practice to grab a pen and paper and list out your reasons as to why you're trying to achieve either the task at hand or create the change that you're trying to create at that given moment in time. And pen to paper, I think, is really underestimated. It's a powerful way and engages the brain much more actively than just thoughts about, oh, I must do that, or I must do that, or I must achieve that. So staying connected to your why is, I think, the biggest way to remain motivated. The second one I would say is to have some form of strategy. Now, this might mean breaking, either if it's a goal, breaking it down into smaller steps. So you have a clear process and you can actually see the small steps that you're achieving. So it builds momentum and your brain recognizes that you are moving forward, which then allows you to take the next step and the next step. But the key is always to plan. It always minimizes procrastination as well. For example, at the end of every day, I check in with the plan for the following day. Every Sunday, I'll check in with the plan for the following week. It means I'm utilising my time better, and it means that my goals are much, much more achievable by breaking them down into smaller steps. And then the third one, which I think is super important too, is resilience. So this is where my self-care routine comes into place, and I think self-care routine for any professional is key. The challenges we often face come in peaks and troughs, but we can navigate through these much more effectively if we remain open and adaptable. And resilience comes into this. And for me, resilience is built up through my self-care routine. So personally, for me, that might involve meditation, it might involve exercise, it might involve regular breaks out in nature and going for a walk. But yes, self-care, I think, is crucial when it comes to building resilience.
Let me just build that a little bit then. I think I'm listening to and putting myself into the context of your answer to see how I react to some of these things. I think in terms of planning, I'm really, really good at planning my work side of my life. Everything is planned to the nth degree. I don't forget anything. I'm organised. But the minute I come away from work, my wife will tell you that I'm the most forgetful, disorganised person ever. And she can't understand why I'm so different in my professional life to my personal life. And she obviously is seeing that now when I'm working from home in this current situation. She's got, oh my God, why aren't you like this outside of work? But as soon as I finish work, I'm so exhausted. My mind just wants to switch off. And I really struggle to stay organised in my personal life. And obviously that has ramifications which aren't always positive. So that's something I'd love to work on. I think I'm very resilient. I think in recruitment you have to be, in payroll you certainly have to be. So I think that's a quality that I personally have. But I'd be really interested to know how you would plan then that self-care routine you've been mentioning. Can you break that down a little bit more so that I can understand how you would go about that? Because I do things like exercise, but it's sporadic. I'll find a moment and I'll go for a run, but I don't plan it necessarily. And with children at home running around your ankles and new ways of working, we're all experiencing at the moment with this new work from home routine, I'm finding planning that personal side probably harder than ever. So do you have any sort of advice you could give me and anyone else that maybe is I guess, feeling the same way I am at the moment, how you could help them as well for listening to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially it comes down to the way our brain works. So the way the brain works is it will move towards pleasure much more willingly than moving away from pain, which is why incentives are really good and knowing what the gain is at all times. So with exercise, you say you do it, but you do it sporadically. So that's more than likely because, you kind of, you should do it, but actually you're not focusing on, or you may not be focusing on the actual thing that we're going to gain, the pleasure that it's going to give us. And that's why...
Which is the why you mentioned earlier.
That's why it's really important to choose an activity that feels good. At the time, yes, exercise, a lot of us don't enjoy exercise at the time doing it, but the reward factor afterwards is where the power lies. And so it's designing a routine that is going to bring you pleasure, and that way you will pick it up much more frequently. Also, the brain likes what's familiar and doesn't like what's unfamiliar, and that means that if we've got bad habits that are serving us, or we are not adopting habits that do serve us, it's going to try and hang on to those. But the good thing is that our brain is neuroplastic, so it can change, it can mold, it can evolve, it can create habits, it can drop habits. But the key is to start making the things that we want to achieve in our daily lives and our daily habits familiar to the brain, which means the first momentum build up is probably going to be the hardest, but once it becomes part of our routine and once we've done it on a regular basis, your brain will stop pushing against that more often than before. In terms of actual tips working from home, so I've got a son, but he's 13. So I know a lot of parents that are working from home are currently struggling with little toddlers running around, and I think the key is to just not be too hard on yourself. Routine is always a good way. But for myself, I've been working from home since I set up the business about 2 years ago. Full-time, it's been just over a year. And there are small things that we can do. So, sticking with the same wake up time and not snoozing, knowing that you're going to be at home. I have a morning routine that eases me into it, whether that's exercise or yoga that day, whether that's meditation. Coffee is key for me.
Me too.
Yeah, but getting dressed and showing up, and no one can see me at the moment, but I tend to wear a face full of makeup. That goes on every morning. I get dressed every morning and I'm ready to work every single day, Monday to Friday by 9 a.m. That's my morning routine, clearly separated from my working day. My working day has a 9 o'clock beginning time and it has a varying end time because I work with clients remotely on Zoom. So some of them will be with me in the evenings if they've got full-time jobs. And with my son, I include him in my exercise. So we're going out while we're in this crazy time. We are going out for evening walks every day, so I'm getting him out of the house. I set him a timetable the night before, so he's getting the necessary work done. I'm much more relaxed, and I've done a bit of research into screen time and what the psychologists are currently recommending, all the child psychologists, and a lot of them are saying relax around screen time, providing that the children are getting their exercise, and I am managing to drag him out every single day. But it's important to not be too hard on ourselves. And I did spend about 2 weeks where I just stripped it back. If it's a new routine and I've now got my husband and my son working from home, it's allowing yourself time to at least become aware of what's working, what's not working. But time is key there, because I think I spoke to a lot of my clients actually at the time that were struggling. They'd lost their momentum, routines, everything out of the window. And it was a case of even me giving myself 2 weeks to just work out how we're going to make this new way work for all of us. And keeping what works and letting go of what doesn't.
So I think you've touched upon something that I'm probably struggling with at the minute. And I mention this because, I work in the payroll world. I'm not a payroll professional, I'm a payroll recruiter, but, I know how hard they work, and I'm sure there'll be some that resonate with this. Is I'm struggling to break from the routine. So my personal biggest anxiety is at the moment actually isn't professionally related. It's more child related, in the sense that I'm now working from home. So my children know I'm home all the time, and I will be for the foreseeable future until the bans are lifted. But my routine means I go out of the house into an outside office, which is a small kind of shed-like building, which I'm in at the minute. I go out in the morning and I don't come back until it's their bedtime. And I get really anxious that they feel I'm just ignoring them because I'm home more, which gets them excited, but I probably see them less or no more than I used to. And that builds on my anxieties, because I'm trying to maintain the routine of professional work, making sure that the work I have to do is done. But I know that I'm home, and therefore, you see these constant, and I know social media can be a good thing and a bad thing. You see all these posts of the people working from home, spending this great time with their children. I feel like I'm locked away. If I'm a payroll professional, I'm locked away processing payrolls. If I'm a recruiter, I'm locked away doing my recruitment work. And actually, I'm not spending that time that everyone is projecting that they are with their children, which kind of builds on that anxiety. So what would be your recommendations for that particular situation?
Oh, I absolutely feel your pain there, Nick. So I'm working from home. I have a remote business, and I am Monday to Friday. I'm at home, and my son's at home, and I actually don't have the luxury of locking myself away in a shed. So I'm very much using the office, which again, everyone's in and out of. The way I've kind of overcome that is I've set an hour in the evening, because we're allowed to obviously go out for that walk in the evening. That's actually turned into such an amazing experience. So the first couple of days, my son's 13 going on 18, there was that reluctance to go out for that walk. But 3 days in, he absolutely loved it, because he was getting that one-to-one time with me, and we don't normally do that in amongst homework and me getting dinner ready and all the other routines that we have pre-corona. So that 1 hour in the afternoon is or late afternoon, beginning of the evening is amazing for both me and my son, going out and having that one-to-one time together. And then the other one is my lunch hour. Now, lunch hour is massive, and now I'm preparing lunch for myself. I'll prepare it for my son, and I might prepare it for my partner if he's not in a meeting. He's working from home as well. So now, rather than just sitting down in the evening for dinner together, I sit down at lunchtime with my son, and we'll have a conversation, we'll have a catch up. And it's really important as well, where even though he's 13, I don't think they understand that they are unsettled. They can't really put what they're feeling into words. So actually, that hour at lunch is even really good, because it allows me to have that conversation with him, make sure he's doing okay. If he's bored, we explore what he's going to do for the rest of the afternoon. And it kind of gives him that security, I guess, that I'm kind of holding him, even though I'm working separately. I am holding him for the day. And then he looks forward to that afternoon out in the fresh air.
Yeah, that's really useful. I'm going to build that in. Maybe that exercise time, which for some reason I'd kept as being an individual time, doesn't need to be. And maybe I'll build that in with my daughter and my son to make that a day-to-day activity we do together. Because I'm not doing that at the minute. And actually, it's a really simple change. So thank you for making that shift. I should also add there are perks. I mean, at the minute my daughter's inside making millionaire shortbreads with my wife, which I'll get the benefits of later on while she learns to cook. So there are perks as well. I've got to look at the positives. Something I mentioned just on the running point you mentioned earlier, and I don't think this is a famous quote, it's something that someone sent to me, but I'll read it out because I thought it was quite interesting. He just sent me an email saying, Nick, remember the feeling you get from a good run is better than the feeling you get from sitting on your sofa wishing you were running.
I will say that I exercise. I will say that I like to be fit and healthy. I did used to weigh quite a few years ago. I was a lot heavier. I was about 5 stone heavier. So even though I will absolutely hold my hands up and say I dislike, intense exercise, but to fit it into my day, it's short. I do, kind of half an hour of intense workout. But I found something I liked, and I like doing weights. And so it took me a long time to find something that I enjoyed and that I liked. And I think that's really, really important when it comes to health and weights and eating better. And it does come with perks. We can plan our meals better, and we can still have breaks in our day to spend time with our kids.
I think that ties in nicely to my next question, because and also there are some out there, particularly in the payroll community. There's an individual in particular I'm thinking of. If she's listening to this, she'll know who I'm referring to her, who would like to exercise her mind rather than her body. That she's a really keen painter and a very talented painter, and that's something that she uses to get away from the these uncertain times, if you like, and the stresses that comes with it. She like to paint, and I think exercising the mind can be as important as exercising the body. But obviously you're an expert here, so can you tell me a little bit why mindset is so important right now?
Yeah, so mindset's huge, right? With mindset, it matters in so many different areas of life, and it affects everything we do. The way we behave, our attitude, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, it's massive. So mindset comes into it massively, especially in challenging times like now. So the actual idea of mindset comes from Dr. Carol Dweck, who's a psychologist, and she introduced us to the concept of these two mindsets. So there's fixed mindset and growth mindset, and some of us might have heard these banded around, but actually looking at them can be really, really useful. So as I said, mindset's essentially about attitudes and beliefs, and Dr. Carol Dweck's work highlights that the impact that each of these mindsets can have on our achievements and our success, but also our resilience and our way of bouncing back from challenging times. And right now, the challenge is very much quite high stress for payroll, with all the areas that you mentioned, but also the idea of uncertainty. And a fixed mindset is essentially a mindset that believes that our traits and intelligence is inborn, it's fixed, it's unchangeable, and that used to be the old school of thought. But Carol Dweck's work shows that growth mindset means that beliefs and traits and intelligence can be developed and it can be changed, but it requires commitment and hard work, but that it's not set in stone. And the reason why mindset plays a critical role in how we cope with life's challenges is because fixed mindset will mean that if we see something as a failure, we are likely to just give up because it's set in stone. Whereas if we adopt the growth mindset around it, and there's loads of articles that we can read on Google, and I would recommend that to all your listeners around these two different mindsets. But with the growth mindset, if you face a challenge, you won't see it as a failure. You will see it as a learning. So even when we work out what's not working, we're still learning something, we're still growing, we're still acquiring new knowledge, even if it's, well, that doesn't work, or that's not serving me, or that doesn't feel right, or there's a better solution. But whenever we're faced with a challenge, a growth mindset will always make us look for the lesson. And that means that in challenging times, we will continue to improve and continue to look for solutions, rather than see that something's not working and then just put it down as a failure and nothing more. Does that make sense?
It does. I've heard the saying growth through failure in the past, but I never liked the word failure because it's kind of a negative connotation. So I haven't used it, but I've heard that used in some of the things that I've read. How do I spell Carol Dweck? I haven't come across her before.
Yeah, so it's Dr. Carol. Carol is Carol and Dweck is Dweck. And her these ideas came from an experiment she actually conducted on children and their learning. But then she extended that research to go into adults and the mindsets that we adopt as adults. But some of the facts and findings in her work are really amazing, and it actually outlines how the mindset can have such a big impact on our achievements and our level of success.
Sure, I'll definitely put a link to her work in the episode notes as well.
Yeah.
So if you recommend her, I'll make sure that other people can access that by going in the episode notes. So using that mindset methodology then from Carol Dweck, how do you yourself, Jazz, put a positive spin on this current situation?
Yeah, so the current situation, coronavirus is an awful illness, and many are suffering. Many are suffering with the illness, many are suffering with losing lost ones, many are suffering with this new way we're working, financial and job difficulties. So I don't want to kind of diminish or take away from everything that a lot of people are going through. But I am also able to find positives. I did write an article up actually, and it's a blog on my website, but a key quote that always comes to my mind, if I may share it with you, Nick, is it's by Sadhguru, and he's got a very different way of thinking of things. And Sadhguru, just for the sake of your listeners, his work will bring quite relaxed peacefulness, and it's spelled Sadhguru. But he's got this really famous quote, and it's actually stuck with me from years ago. And he says, "You cannot suffer your past or failure because they do not exist. What you are suffering is your memories and your imagination." So in times of uncertainty where we're suffering anxiety, it's usually because we're worrying about something that may happen in the future. And what this quote for me summarizes is the power of the present. And many of us may have heard that, but this kind of brings it to the forefront. So, if we're suffering with depression, that's usually caused by painful memories from the past. If we're suffering with anxiety, that's usually caused by worry about the future. So the present moment is kind of all we have, especially when every single day we're waking up and things are changing on a daily basis, right? And even with payroll professionals, there's so many changes that are happening so quickly at the moment. So we're at this heightened level of response. And so the only moment the most likely moment that we're going to find peace is in the present moment. And this new way of working in this new world at the moment, the new norm that's evolving where things are changing, we're almost being forced to live in the present. And so that does mean, we're getting more time with our loved ones. Although I appreciate that a lot of us are working, including myself, my time isn't now spent, or my evenings, with the wider circle in my life of people and friends. It's very much honed in on the people that are in my life that I'm with and that I'm isolating with at this moment in time. I'm also finding that I've lost interest in the things I normally loved to wind down with, whether that's TV or watching something completely addictive on Netflix. There's the time now where I'm getting a chance to plan and do the things that I didn't. So the books that I never got around to reading, the podcasts I never got time to listen to, including yours. Writing, painting, all these things that I've always wanted to do and never had time for. I'm now spending more conscious of my evening time and spending it doing the things that I love. And then there's the whole idea of feeling so lifted by how our country and our key workers are all coming together. And I think kindness and hope have massively been pushed to the forefront and are key drivers in how we're responding to this. And then I would say that the final thing I guess I've done is a lot of people went on Nextdoor. I don't know if you're aware of that platform, but I'm not on any social media. So I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on Twitter. I am only on LinkedIn. And so my world is quite small anyway, but it's allowed me to put a post up to help neighbours that are in quarantine or elderly neighbours on my street. And I've been out doing bits, knocking on their doors, sometimes being the only person that they're speaking to through the window. And so that can lift you, that can make you feel better. And giving actually is scientifically recorded to give us more pleasure and more happy hormones than just doing something for ourselves. So sometimes when, and I did this in my own healing journey, I've done loads of voluntary work. So I did about 4 years with Hertfordshire Society for the Deaf and Blind. I've been a Samaritans volunteer, as a listening volunteer for the suicide helpline. And that's because, I could have done it. You could say it's for selfish reasons, but the feeling of giving in times like this is hugely uplifting. And you almost feel like, where we can't control everything around us, we can focus on the things we can control and focus on the things we can give back. And that's a really good way of navigating through this.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think, and I totally agree as well. I think the way that we've pulled together as a nation, as a community, with the healthcare workers, as you mentioned, but also more siloed sectors like the payroll sector. I mean, the payroll community is really, really coming together at the minute. They're all helping each other. There's no ego. There's people that I could easily name here on this podcast that have really put themselves above the parapet to help others for no financial benefit except for just helping other people, and it's been a fantastic thing to witness. And in terms of recruitment, and let's be honest, as much as I hate to say it, my sector is relatively quiet at the moment. Recruitment doesn't tend to be top of companies' minds at the moment. So instead, we're putting our attentions into trying to bring those communities together, and it's been a really as you say, in terms of making you feel good and getting positives out of it, it's been a really nice exercise and something that I'm really enjoying. It's not a financial return benefit, it's just bringing people together to help, and that's been really good. My daughter as well, she's only 10 years old, but she's been drawing portraits for people for £5, which she's donated to the NHS, and she's raised £450 this week, doing sort of anime style portraits. So I'll do a little plug for her, but she's there are some feel-good stories, and there is lots of positives to take. And I think the other one that I've noticed, which is kind of ironic, is during this isolation, I feel like the nation's found a love for nature again. People are now going out, and rather than walking on their iPhones and head down texting whilst walking, people are actually looking at what's around them, enjoying nature that's around them, and people are desperate to utilise that hour to the best way possible, which is really enjoying the colours and the nature and the experience, which I don't think we really did before. We were so head down and so rushed, it was almost a chore, whereas now people are really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's we're almost like it's almost a stripped back version, but yeah, it's the natural things that the world provides us is kind of what we're left with at the moment, and to find that kind of joy in those moments, and coming together and joining with, and as you've said, you've still got payroll staff. So I mentioned key workers; they are absolutely key workers. People are suffering with financial difficulties. People are feeling uncertain about their finances. And your listeners are absolutely helping others navigate through that in the best way they possibly can. So, I would add, there are key workers. I don't think is confined to just, like you say, the NHS. It's huge, and actually, it's now coming to light. All these different professions that keep our country ticking and our world ticking, so that we can all get through this together.
Absolutely agree with you. And the payroll profession is definitely one of those that have kept the UK paid in what is a time where, if we talk about mental health, which it probably makes sense to move on to, we all know that financial well-being has a huge impact on mental health, and to make sure that the UK continues to get paid is a great way to help reduce the impact of the financial concerns that people are experiencing. So that's where the payroll profession really is playing an absolutely critical role, is making sure those furlough calculations are correct, that people's payroll calculations are correct, so that they are worrying less about the finances at the end of the month.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can I recruit payroll staff effectively? Please don't give up on your recruitment project just yet. Here at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting and retaining top payroll talent. We also understand just how costly a poor payroll hire can be. JGA Recruitment are a niche payroll recruitment agency who will partner with you to resource payroll candidates who will improve both the accuracy and efficiency of your payroll department. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
If we talk about mental health for a moment, is there any advice specifically you would give to help minimise the impact of isolation? And I guess, what recommendations would you give for payroll professionals and others, of course, sort of helping to manage their mental health during this outbreak? I read something that, for example, for those working at home, they shouldn't be working in their bedroom, for example. And are there other things that are perhaps greater than that you can sort of bring into the conversation about managing mental health?
Yeah, so I think I touched a little bit on these, but yeah, so there's, I'll kind of share what I do. So there's a very clear, my bedroom is for sleeping, my living room is for watching TV, and my office is for working. When you separate and create these very separate moments and areas of space, your brain will switch mode much more easily, so that when you're in your office, it will hone in and get used to the fact that in this room, it's about focus, it's about concentration. I would absolutely encourage payroll staff and your listeners that are highly stressed to take these regular breaks and see what works for them. It's easy to sit back and say, take a break every hour or take 5 minutes every 40 minutes. I actually think it's good to try and test it, because every person is an individual and every person's brain will respond completely differently. So what actually comes into play now is this awareness, this self-awareness about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Your eating times, your break times, all of that. But absolutely, you need to step away. And when I say step away or take a break, I would discourage of, if you say you're working on your computer and then you think, I'm going to take a break, and then you start going on the internet and looking at other things, your brain's not going to have that break, because it's still sitting where it was, it's still looking at what it was looking, and your posture and your body hasn't had that break. So I would encourage each break to be getting up from your computer or wherever it is that you're working, walking into a separate room, might be 5 minutes in your garden, but create those clear, absolute divides between work and break time. And if you have got other people around, as I said, lunchtime's a great way of catching up with people that are working from home in your home, or your children in that time. Other than that, I think I've addressed the get up, set your start time, set your off time, and stick with those routines every single day. It will become easier because it becomes much more familiar to the brain. So it starts working. It's just the first few days or the first maybe 2 weeks where it still might feel a little bit uneasy. But the brain just takes practice. It's a muscle that requires training, and it does grab onto new habits quite quickly. We just need to do them consistently.
Sure. No, I think that's great advice. Something I'd like to ask, you mentioned having a nice sleep environment. It's something that I've personally suffered from insomnia for nearly 15 years. I used to have my own sleep website, so I've got a little bit of experience in the science behind sleep. But obviously, as a life coach for yourself, at the minute, there's going to be a lot of anxieties on people's minds, and anxieties are often the first cause of potentially long-term insomnia issues that could come later, because eventually the anxiety might subside, but the worry of not sleeping actually takes over, and it causes a new problem altogether. So I know that people at the minute, sleep is a really important part of people's lives. They feel energized when they get good sleep, and it's able to compartmentalize all the worries they have, if you like, when they get a good night's sleep. Are there any tips you could give for people that are worried about sleep at the minute? They have got anxieties on their mind, and they're listening to this going, that's all well and good, but actually I can do all those things. I can take my breaks, I can take my walks. When it comes to putting my head on the pillow, I just can't get to sleep, or I'm having intermittent sleep. What advice would you give for helping, I guess it's a two-part question, helping managing those anxieties, number one, and B, then managing them enough to improve their sleep quality?
Okay, so I've actually been through this myself. So when obviously I was going through my own challenges and my career was kind of not, I didn't fit anywhere. I was quite detached from the world. My mental health issues were quite extensive and quite deep rooted. So I'll absolutely share what the two things that I did to remedy those that worked for me. So the first one was journaling. To get into it, sometimes, our brain's very visual. So, I did go out, I bought this very nice book. It was kind of going to incentivize me, and I was going to look forward to writing into it every evening. And it was for that reason. I would go to bed thinking about the future or thinking about the past. It was a real struggle to be present. And I couldn't find that point. So what I did instead was I journaled, and all these worries and all my thoughts, pen to paper, again, you're processing these thoughts. So you're almost leaning into them. If we try and shut them out, I would say, and I'm not a psychologist, but for me personally, through personal experience, what I found is if I actually openly acknowledge how I'm feeling and write it down with pen to paper, my brain responds, processes it a lot better. And also, looking back on it, you might find the next day that you're journaling something completely different. So it's quite a wake-up call when you look back and you realize, well, actually, this will pass. Or it might be that it's a reoccurring thing, but then you're journaling it, you're releasing it, you're processing it, and that pen to paper means that your brain is engaging with those thoughts. So you're almost leaning into them rather than shutting them down. And I think shutting them down can cause its own problems, which is why I ended up where I did 10 years ago. Journaling is a really good way of getting something out of your mind onto paper, and it's a form of release. The other thing is with anxiety. So I've had, at the other end of it, the hard end of it was daily panic attacks and things like that. So to manage that, I did meditation. I don't do meditation in the evenings anymore because I don't feel like I need it. I just do it in the morning. But there are so many useful meditations on YouTube. What I would say is there are apps out there like Headspace and things like that, but some of them will, you'll pick up a different meditation every day or anything that feels good. What's worked for me in particular is finding one and sticking with it, because your brain will eventually fire up different neural pathways, but it needs to listen to the same thing over and over and over and over again for it to fully feel that relaxed state that we all strive for before we go to sleep. And so for me, I would say over and above anything else that's worked for me is the journaling to release, and then the meditation to bring me a sense of calm. Meditation hasn't naturally come to me. It's something I struggled with right at the beginning. And what I found was that with meditation, my mind wandered a lot. There were a lot of thoughts that I found it counterproductive. So what I actually found more useful was guided meditation, when you have a voice over the meditation, and I tune into the voice and it keeps me focused on the voice. So again, try and test different kinds of meditation. Some people don't like having a dialogue or a voice on top of their meditation. They feel quite peaceful in that stillness with just a bit of music or just no sound. But for me, in order to not get so caught up in my thoughts at the time, I tend to respond much better to guided meditation and having a voice to follow on over the top of the meditation.
Yeah, I think that's really useful advice. And actually, I struggle with meditation as well, but guided meditation is something that's worked for me, so I can definitely attest to that. There is some people are struggling. In my experience, I'm obviously haven't mastered it yet because I'm still suffer from insomnia from times, but it's much better now. But some of the things that have worked for me, which may help people if they're listening, if it's not guided meditation, then there's specific sleep music you can download from Amazon or whatever it is you utilize to get your music. But there's music called binaural music, which is quite specific, helps sort of tune in to the mind to help your waves sort of settle for sleep. So look up binaural music, might be really useful. A couple of things that have helped me if people are interested, if you are stressed, is I'm a huge coffee fan, but I don't take caffeine after 2:00. I don't do any hard exercise 2 hours before bed. I think that's quite useful. And I think going back to the anxiety piece, the one thing that's really helped me, and I've been suffering from this for probably over 15 years now, is the worst thing I can do is worry about not sleeping. So I'll go to bed. If I can't get to sleep, it'll worry me. What happens if I can't sleep tonight? If I can be able to flip it to say it's only one night, it's just one night. If as soon as I'm able to flip that in my mind, I tend to fall asleep. If I'm able to win that battle, and I can't always win it, if I can convince myself it's just one night, it'll be fine, I tend to fall asleep. But if I sit the whole night worrying about not sleeping, that's almost a bigger anxiety. So I want to try and take that sort of anxiety off the table by flipping that over. And there are some core things we can do as well, which are more physical, which are things like a hot bath, which raises the core body temperature. If you have a hot bath before bed and then get into a cold bed, the quicker that core body temperature drops, the quicker your body will release melatonin, which encourages sleep. A shower doesn't work because it doesn't actually raise the core body temperature, so it needs to be a bath. But if you are really worried about sleeping, then actually having a hot bath immediately before bed and then getting into a cold bedroom, the quicker that body temperature drops, the quicker, hopefully, your body will respond with the hormones in the brain like melatonin and serotonin, which will help encourage sleep. So a couple of tips for me. As a genuine insomnia sufferer, they may help. But certainly the anxiety areas that you mentioned, like journaling, was something I don't do, so I'm going to add that to my list. And the other aspects you've mentioned, I think, are really, really helpful for those that are worrying.
Can I just add to that as well, Nick? Like with our brain and the way it responds, and some of the things you've said there are fantastic, actually. But when you've mentioned about the bath, again with the bath, you've got the chemical reaction that's happening in your body, but also if you do certain things before you go to bed, your brain will almost start winding down in anticipation for bed. So there might be certain things like it might be a bath, it might be moisturising, it might be taking a shower, it might be, but having a clear routine before you wind down to bed, every single step you take, your brain will very quickly learn that, this is the bedtime routine, I'm starting to wind down to bed. And, it doesn't take long before your brain starts to recognize these are signals for bedtime, these are signals for wake up, these are signals for working. But you just need to kind of keep that routine going so that your brain knows what it is, it anticipates what's coming, and then it's a lot more cooperative.
Absolutely agree. I think a sleep routine is really, if you're struggling, is a really, really important thing to adopt and to generate and call it a sleep routine. I think is really, really important. I think also some of the anxieties relate to while we're on the subject, because something I've got some experience in, is the idea that we all need 8 hours sleep, and that's really related to how many sleep cycles we get, because the average sleep cycle will allow us to have more if we average 8 hours, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you individually need 8 hours. So if you've got that as an anxiety in your head, oh my god, I've only had 7 hours. Sometimes you're telling yourself you've had, it doesn't necessarily mean your body needed 8. So sometimes for a lot of people, actually moving your alarm clock earlier by 15 minutes can make you feel a lot more rejuvenated when you wake up than actually making it later, because it very much depends on which sleep cycle you are being awoken from. So if you are someone listening to this and every morning you are hitting that snooze button because you just cannot get out of bed because you're tired, it could just be that you've gone back into a more deeper sleep cycle and you're waking up at the worst possible time. And actually setting it slightly earlier before you go into that stage might be more beneficial. And when you wake up in the right sleep cycle, I can tell you feel like you can take on the world instantly. If you're in that really light sleep state, it's the best time to wake up. So it's well worth playing with your alarm clock and just moving it back or forward by 15-minute increments until you find that right time. And you'll know when you find it, because for me, it's quite transformational.
Yeah, great tip there.
So last thing, and you've mentioned also that you've had some experience working on suicidal voluntary work, and I don't want to avoid this subject, because as we go further into this, I know, and we all know, that some anxieties, no matter how much we try and manage them, are going to manifest, they're going to get bigger, they're going to get greater. And we know when it comes to things like financial management and sort of managing budgets through what is a particularly difficult crisis at the moment, where none of us have a crystal ball, we're trying to predict the end to it, but we don't know where it is. For those that are finding themselves on a bit of a spiral, be it because of financial concerns, be it because of the stress at work, and they do find themselves in that situation where they are really at the end of a precipice and they don't know what to do, and maybe they're having suicidal thoughts or they're having something very dangerous thoughts, what would be your advice to those people listening to it now going, I don't know where to turn, I don't know what to do? And it's all become too much. I don't have experience in this area, but I know that you do. I'd love to know if there is someone listening to this maybe a couple of weeks down the line and they're at that place now. What would you say to them? What could you advise?
Absolutely talk to someone over and above anything else. I can't encourage it enough. It took me 2 years before I did. And by that time, I was, at the worst case, suicidal, which is why it was such a privilege to be able to be a volunteer for the Samaritans. We can have these, sometimes they can catch us off guard. I never in a million years thought that I would end up, that bad. If I had, I would have addressed it a lot sooner. So I think if you see the triggers beforehand, talk to someone. And actually, I always offer an initial free call for anyone that wants to talk and need a bit of support or to get something off the chest, especially at this moment in time. There are so many places out there and so many people, so many coaches, so many counsellors that are actually offering their time for free if you don't want to speak to a loved one or family member. And if you do want to reach out, I'm sure your loved ones or family members would love for you to speak to them when you're struggling or you're having these thoughts. That would be the biggest one for me. I would say absolutely don't avoid it. Talk about it openly with someone you trust. And sometimes the person you feel more willingly to do that or to trust is someone who isn't in your family and isn't a loved one. And that was certainly the case for me. I didn't have the best experience. So I eventually, after 2 years, did succumb and went to my doctor and was referred to a counsellor on the NHS. And after 2 years, I met her and I was like anticipating that, oh my God, I've finally taken the step and everything's going to be fixed. And I went and spoke to this counsellor and it wasn't pretty. There was tears and snot everywhere, and it's two years worth of pent up pain, which actually related to a lot more from my past. And she turned around and said she couldn't help me. And at that point, I was like, oh my God, even a professional can't help me. And that's when I hit rock bottom. It was like suicidal thoughts. But thankfully, I did find a counsellor that I could speak to, talk to privately. And I used that probably a lot longer than I anticipated, where I've said I was in counselling for 4 years and maybe I shouldn't have been in it for that long. But I also I did very much lean on people I trusted within my own circle and within my very, very inner circle of trusted people and friends.
I think also for those that there's this horrible stigma about counselling, and actually by talking, if that's going to solve your problem, forget the stigma with it, because I've been through counselling myself. Believe it or not, for those listening to this, because they see me do lots of public videos and be quite extrovert, I became quite agoraphobic for a short period of my life where I didn't want to leave the house. Funny enough, we're not allowed to in isolation, but I went through it when we were allowed to many years ago. And it's a very weird feeling for someone who, in my own position, I'm very extrovert, always have been since being a kid, and I had a traumatic experience that left me agoraphobic and scared to leave the house. And it was only talking to a counsellor who, as you said, was outside of my immediate network that I felt comfortable talking to that really helped me through. And it really frustrates me when I hear people worried about, I don't need counselling because of X, Y, and Z. There is no, everyone's different. And, if you need to speak to someone to help you through a tough time, then as you say, there are loads of people out there willing to listen. And I will list some of those. I've got the Sane Line, Samaritan, Support Line, and others. I will put some links in the episode notes for those that are worried and want to reach out. Of course, in addition to Jazz's details as well, if you want to take advantage of Jazz very kindly offering a free call as well. So I'll make sure those links are in the episode notes.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of support groups out there that might be specifically for payroll staff and groups out there and webinars out there and articles out there around mental health. But I think the most powerful thing will be to open up and speak to someone, whether that's someone outside of your circle or inside.
Absolutely agree. And all I can say here, Jazz, it's probably takes us to a close. I don't want to finish on a down note, but it's almost the most important note to say there's always help out there. There's always someone willing to listen. If you are struggling with mental health, struggling with anxiety, address it, speak to someone you love, speak to someone outside of your network, speak to Jazz if you need to. There is lots of help out there. I hope from listening to this podcast you've been able to take away a lot of advice, a lot of guidance that Jazz has very kindly offered today to help you navigate these choppy waters as we go through the coronavirus situation. Let's hope that the whole world comes through this sooner rather than later. Unless you've got any final words you'd like to add to that, Jazz?
No, I think we've covered loads. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
No, I've really enjoyed it too. It's been an absolute pleasure and extremely relevant for the times we're experiencing. So thank you so much for coming on to this at relatively short notice. You recommended to me by a payroll professional who I know and love and have worked with for many years, Linda Pullen, if you're listening. Thank you for the recommendation. If you want to find out more about Jazz, obviously the links will be in the episode notes. I'll put a link to Jazz's LinkedIn profile, but you can go straight to her website and find out more about Jazz's story as well, because she's very open about her own experiences. I know we've touched upon it briefly during this podcast, but if you want to find out more, please go to jazzpitt.com, and I will put that link in the episode notes as well. So that's all for me today from the Payroll Podcast. Of course, during these times of crisis, you may not be a priority for you, but if you do need support with either an immediate temporary payroll vacancy to help with your furlough calculations, or if you need support recruiting a permanent payroll member of staff, then please do get in touch with me. We are still working business as usual. We have access to all the full working from home technologies that we need to help you with remote onboarding and video interviewing and things like that. So do get in touch. You can reach me at nick@jgarecruitment.com or give me a call on 07807 094 734. Thanks so much for listening. Please, all of you, stay healthy, take care of yourselves and each other, and I will speak to you all again real soon. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment. If you need help with a current payroll vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favourite podcast channels. Till next time.